Hi, and my special guest today is Rebecca Halpern, and she is from this really neat documentary on the life of Charlie Trotter. She's the director and writer of Love Charlie, which is a documentary on the life and times of legendary chef Charlie Trotter. Rebecca, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I had just told you I'm not extremely familiar with him, and I'm kind of ashamed because that's what I am. Also, I'm a chef as well. But I figure I'm gonna let you fill us in on, just tell us a little bit about Charlie for those also in my listening audience that are not familiar with him.
It's interesting that you should say that you're not familiar with him, even though you're a chef,
Right.
because I think one of the main reasons why we made this movie now is because Charlie's legacy stands to be lost to time. He
Uh-huh.
opened his restaurant in 1987 in Chicago and
Uh-huh.
just exploded onto the scene. He put
Uh-huh.
Chicago on the map for food and
Uh-huh.
revolutionized fine dining in the United States.
Wow.
So many of the things that we take for granted today, things
Mhm.
like the kitchen table, high-end vegetarian cuisine. He was using quinoa before anybody even knew what quinoa was.
Oh, wow.
He invented microgreens, which are now ubiquitous across the board from fast casual all the way to, the finest dining establishments in the country.
Yes, yes.
His cookbooks, in many respects, made him the godfather of food porn. Our Instagram feeds today
Uh-huh.
would not look like they do, but for the photography that he used in his cookbooks,
Uh-huh.
which no one had ever done before that. His
Uh-huh.
photography gets really up close and personal, which in the 90s was unheard of. And they
Uh-huh.
look more like coffee table books
Oh,
than they
wow.
do like cookbooks, which up until then
Yes.
had been more like, how-to guides for making recipes. It wasn't this
Yes.
like deeper philosophical visual exploration of the composition and sort of the artfulness of the plate in the way that Charlie made it for
Wow.
himself. Um,
Yes.
he was obsessed with exceptional ingredients and
Uh-huh.
he had an exacting management style.
Uh-huh.
He insisted on doing 2 10-course tasting menus every night.
Mm-hmm.
He changed the menus every night.
Uh-huh.
So that means that he was making 20 new dishes a day, and he
Wow.
ran his restaurant for 25 years.
Oh my goodness.
So whereas a regular chef might change the menu seasonally, come up with a list of dishes that he keeps for a period of months, Charlie was changing it up every day, just like a jazz musician might change a composition of, a song that they play in concert or whatever.
Wow. Is this in all of his restaurants? He would do that? Like he does
Well,
on frequent?
certainly at his namesake restaurant, he, like many chefs, he was among the first generation of celebrity chefs. So coming up in that class, you had Emeril Lagasse, you had
Right.
Thomas Keller, you had Daniel Boulud. A little bit later, you had Wiley Dufresne, but he was sort of among this first generation, and these were the guys who kind of pioneered that idea of chef as CEO, as well as the auteur that they were in their own restaurants, right?
Yes.
So he
Yes.
started to branch out, and Charlie did the same. He had several restaurants. He tried to have restaurants in Vegas twice. He had a restaurant in Cabo San Lucas. He had sauces and smoked salmon that he licensed. He had a to-go place in
Uh-huh.
Chicago for gourmet to-go food. I once took out for Thanksgiving from there because I used to live in Chicago. I'm from Chicago.
Uh-huh.
And there was like no end in sight. I mean, he wrote 14 cookbooks. I mean, the guy was prolific.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, because I think he was more intellectual than, say, an Emeril was,
Uh-huh.
whereas Emeril's career sort of took off with the rise of the Food Network,
Right.
Charlie's went a different direction with the route of the cookbooks.
Uh-huh.
Because of that, and because of the timing of the restaurant, which came along before social media, I
Right.
I don't think people remember Charlie as much as they do Emerald or other
Right.
chefs of his
I
generation.
just wanted to ask you, so he wasn't right because Emerald was on, the Food Network. He was one of the first people on chefs on Food Network. So Charlie, that's what I wanted to ask you. Was Charlie ever, I'm sure he might have done like a cameo or something on the Food Network. Did he ever do anything like that?
Oh, sure. He showed up on the Food Network, and later in the restaurant's life, he actually had his own PBS cooking show
Oh,
called
there you go.
The Kitchen Sessions,
Uh-huh.
which was on PBS. I don't know if it's that he didn't want to be on Food Network for some
Right.
reason, or if he thought PBS was a better outlet for him and his
Right.
audience. But the shows themselves were really fascinating,
Uh-huh.
and a good glimpse into his creative process.
Wow. Yes, that's interesting. I know the Food Network is has a little bit more of a different feel than PBS, so maybe that's why, he didn't get to the Food Network and just stuck to, I think PBS gives you really a lot more of your own kind of, you can put your own style and creativity in it, where Food Network is a little more commercial and you have to kind of have a little bit more of their guidelines. So it sounds like he would have been the type of chef that wants to, use his own, which I could understand.
Well,
Um,
Charlie, it's interesting. So the reason why his two restaurants in Vegas failed was because, hoteliers want to turn the tables fast in Vegas and get the gamblers
yes,
out on the casino floor. And
yes.
Charlie Trotter insisted on sticking to his brand, which was a 3-hour, 10-course tasting menu.
Wow.
And so you start to understand the business behind why he failed there.
Yes, yes.
And then, just in terms of the Food Network versus PBS and, why Charlie didn't sort of scale up in the way Emerald did,
Right.
Charlie Trotter was an enigma. He
Hmm.
was an extremely intellectual person. He loved Ayn Rand
Uh-huh.
and very esoteric pieces of literature,
Uh,
film. Like
uh-huh.
he would stop his staff down in the middle of service to go watch Fitzcarraldo, which is an obscure film by Werner Herzog. It's a 3-hour movie. And he
Uh-huh.
would send them next door to watch it. And basically the movie's about this guy who's basically taking a barge through the Amazon, and he gets a group of local indigenous people to help him foist the barge up over a mountain so that they
Uh-huh.
don't have to go through this long journey. Anyway, it's all about pushing a boulder up a hill, right? More or less.
Yes, yes.
Metaphor. And that's very much what chefs in a kitchen have to do together. They all have to be marching together in the same direction. That was
Exactly.
Charlie. And that level of intellectualism, I think, is not something that is relatable in the way
Uh-huh.
that Emerald and some of the other Food Network celebrity chefs are
Uh-huh.
to the masses. And so,
Wow.
that's why PBS was probably also a good outlet for him. But
Yes.
yeah.
So he has a series, or had a series of cookbooks. So can you tell us, again, unfortunately, since I'm not familiar with him, but now I want to make, now you've really sparked my curiosity. I know I've heard his name. It's just that I don't know a whole lot about him, but I definitely do want to find out more. But can you tell us, so what eventually, I guess, what happened, or what was the
Sure.
demise?
I'll give you the whole story in a nutshell. So,
Yes.
Chef
Or will
Charlie,
this spoil the documentary if we tell that, or no?
well, it's his life story. So, I'll keep one element to myself, and then
Okay.
you'll discover that in watching the film. But
Uh-huh.
the bottom line is, Charlie Trotter was a self-taught chef. He
Uh-huh.
never once really worked in any kitchen for more than a period of a couple months before he
Uh-huh.
opened the restaurant when he was 27 years old,
Right.
in 1987.
Hmm.
And he exploded onto the scene, put Chicago on the map for food,
Uh-huh.
did two 10-course tasting menus every night.
Uh-huh.
And for 25 years, he worked relentlessly to have what was or would have been a 3 Michelin star restaurant. At that time, however, Michelin had not come to the United States yet. They didn't show up until in Chicago until 2011. And in 2011, basically, Charlie had the who's who of up and coming chefs come and work for him because he was running one of the best restaurants in America. I mean, his flock of proteges is so impressive in terms, it's the who's who of today's culinary world. And
Yes.
so I would say kind of chief among them is Grant Achatz of Alinea. And Grant Achatz, sort of helped to bring molecular gastronomy to the United States. And really, he won 3 Michelin stars every year that Alinea has been open, I think. I might be misspeaking there. But anyway, so like just an incredible visionary talent. Grant and Charlie had a falling out. Grant actually only ended up working for Charlie for 2 months. He was obsessed with Charlie Trotter when he found one of Charlie's cookbooks in a bookstore, and then wrote Charlie Trotter a letter every day for I don't know how long to try to get the opportunity to work there. And when he finally did, being this young upstart who was obsessed with this chef, Charlie Trotter, he gets in the kitchen and the scales kind of fall from his eyes, and he realizes that Charlie Trotter is not the guy that he imagined he would be. And he had a horrible experience at Trotter's. And it's kind of gone down in Chicago food history lore as this mega beef, for lack of a better word. It was extremely competitive and very, there was a lot of animosity there between the two of them in Chicago.
Right.
Long story short, Charlie Trotter in year 23 of the restaurant, Michelin shows up. They give Grant Achatz, who opened his restaurant, Alinea, literally a few blocks away from Charlie Trotter's. They give him 3 Michelin stars, and Charlie only gets 2. And the same year, the same thing happens. And he decides to close the restaurant. And a year later, Chef Charlie Trotter died. And so the film is an exploration of what happens when your identity becomes intrinsically, when your identity becomes intertwined in your work, and what happens when the work goes away. It's very much a cautionary tale. I like to say, if you play the same role for 25 years, do you become that person? And then what happens when the movie's over? Who are you? And so our film delves into, we go very deep into who Charlie Trotter was before he opened the restaurant. His name, he went by Chuck. All of his friends and family knew him as Chuck. And we got access to 350 postcards that he wrote to his first wife, Lisa, before they opened the restaurant together. And in those postcards, you really start to see this young guy, a visionary whose passion knew no bounds. I mean, he loved art and literature and music like Bob Dylan, and he loved Stevie Wonder, and he loved the Talking Heads. I mean, he was a cool dude, and he loved Apocalypse Now, and, all of these incredible films that he would write about. And when he went to open the restaurant, his father bankrolled him to open the restaurant. They saw what a prodigious talent he was. Right. His father bankrolled the restaurant. And when they were thinking about what to name the restaurant, they thought that Chuck Trotter sounded like a steakhouse. So the marketing people suggested Charlie Trotter's. And in that moment, Chuck knew that he needed to become this chef Charlie Trotter. He needed to assume this role in order to make his restaurant successful. And in doing so, he lost sight of his authentic self, which we argue in the film is Chuck. Right. And became consumed by Charlie Trotter.
Yes. It became a thing, kind of. And wow.
Yeah. Yes. So it's a kind of searing portrait of like what happens when you lose any and all balance in your life when you
Right.
relentlessly pursue something. And in Charlie's case, it was excellence. He was all about excellence.
Uh-huh.
When you relentlessly pursue that day in and day out for that many years, and the media portrays you a certain way, and people think of you a certain way, whether they know you or not, you
Yes,
know, are you that person? Who are you?
exactly. Who are you? And then you're losing your real identity. Oh wow. So tell us what, so he had a lot of cookbooks, so people can certainly probably still find his cookbooks that they're out there.
Oh, for sure. In fact, I'll just turn my camera here, but I don't know if you can
Yes.
see that tall tower
Yes.
of
Oh
cookbooks.
wow, that's all his cookbooks.
Those are all his. Yeah.
Wow.
And
And
they're still lauded today as these groundbreak. They're just as beautiful as
uh-huh.
any cookbooks that you see coming out
Wow.
today.
Wow. He sounds like kind of like a Leonardo da Vinci of his time, of the food industry in a sense.
I think that's a very apt comparison for
Uh-huh.
sure.
Yeah, definitely. So tell us, so has the documentary just been released? Has it been out for a while?
So the documentary is going to be released November 18th
Oh,
in
not
3 days.
3 days.
It'll be available on Amazon and Apple on demand, as well as in select theaters over the next week or so. There'll be some screenings. So
Uh-huh.
I highly recommend seeing it in person and in a theater. The
Theater.
score, the visuals. We started production on day one of the COVID lockdown.
Oh, wow.
And we were so lucky to have all of these archival materials because it enabled us to create this world, this kind of collage world
Mhm.
of him through these materials. And so what you see in the movie, it's almost like he's inviting you over and opening a shoebox under his bed, that has all these postcards and these newspaper clippings and all. It's like a museum exhibition, but
Exactly.
on film. And that
Yes.
world, that texture, this was 1987 when he opened the restaurant. The 1980s and 90s were a different time. People send you a text message today, it's meaningless. But when you had
Uh-huh.
to write a postcard to someone,
Uh-huh.
you had to go pick out that postcard and buy it in person. You couldn't buy it online. You had to go buy the stamps in person. You had to sit down and write that postcard. And then you had to go to the mailbox to mail it. The amount
Mhm.
of care and, by extension, love that he showed through his postcards
Uh-huh.
was a kind of connection that I think a lot of us are missing in this kind of like disposable world that we live in today. We don't do that anymore. And Charlie, when he opened the restaurant, those
Uh-huh.
two 10-course tasting menus,
Uh-huh.
that's just another form of the postcards. That's how the postcards and the love and care that he poured into those to connect with others sort
Uh-huh.
of translated over to his work. But
Yes.
eventually it obviously became corrupted
So
over.
is that where you got the title Love Charlie, I guess, from postcards, right? Writing? That's what it
Yes, well,
was.
from the writing, but the thing is, Charlie Trotter had he had a favorite quote that he often signed the inside of his cookbooks with. It
Uh-huh.
said, "After love, there's only cuisine." And
Oh, that's a great
that
song.
my mom was a food writer in Chicago in the 80s and 90s, and
Uh-huh.
when I started working on this, she sent me all of his cookbooks, and inside his original, this is his first cookbook that I'm holding here, there's this inscription to her, to my mother, that says,
Uh-huh. Oh,
"After
wow.
love, there's only cuisine." And I think what that means for Charlie is like, you know it's a sad quote in a way when you look at the
Right.
arc of his life story. He couldn't have balance. He couldn't have like real meaningful connection and love with people in his own personal life. All
Right.
he had was cuisine in a way. But the care that he poured into his food and into these postcards was love. And so
Right.
it was his idea of what love really was.
And actually that is for some people, I mean, the Italian culture, and I only know about that because that's what I am. A lot of people tend to kind of express their love through giving food. So that's what it really sounds like, he did by all that extra care was really expressing love in some way. But it sounds like a really incredible documentary. So tell everybody again where they can find it. So it's coming out November 18th.
So it's called Love Charlie,
Of
The
Charlie.
Rise. Love Charlie, The Rise and Fall of Chef Charlie Trotter. It's going to be on Apple and Amazon for rent or purchase on November 18th.
Uh-huh.
And it'll be in select theaters throughout the next week or so. I would recommend that anyone who's interested in seeing it in person, that they log on to Instagram or Facebook to Love Charlie Movie, and they can get access to the information about screenings there.
Great. Yeah, I'm sure it'd be wonderful to see in a theater, in a live theater. So, Rebecca, thank you so much, and much success with this documentary. I'm gonna definitely check it out as soon.
Maria, if you want to have another conversation after you've gotten to see it, I'd be
Yes.
happy to jump on
Oh,
the phone
yes,
with
I will let
you.
you know. Definitely, definitely. Did they send me a screening link? I think they did. Do you know if anyone
I would
can?
imagine so, but
I
Kim can send you
yeah,
one right
I'll
now.
make
I
sure. Kim, can
actually
you?
did, Maria.
Okay, great. I
Yeah,
thought you did.
it's
It's
on
just
our
that.
email chain.
Great. I had some book signing appearances and things like that, and I haven't been able to look at it, but I will definitely do that this week. I will let you know. I'll let Kim know then after I've seen it, maybe after Thanksgiving.
Because
We
it's a
can do something.
complicated story, Maria, and I feel like once you see it, the conversation, you might feel like it's
There's
a little
even
more
more to it.
pointed. Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, definitely, definitely. But I love I love what you've told us already, because I think it's definitely a lot to pique people's
To
interest in
digest.
this, yes, in this incredible person. So thanks so much for being here, Rebecca. Thank you. And
Thank
I
you,
will be
Maria.
watching and let you know.
Have a great Thanksgiving holiday. We'll speak soon.